Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about the grid system for Bootstrap 3. I want to start off by saying if at the end of this video you completely understand the Bootstrap layout system, you are awesome. Because for most of us it takes at least 2 or 3 times of looking at the material, playing with it, and then doing it all over again to really get a good understanding of how this works. So I'm hoping that you'll follow along with me. We'll do an example in one of the next videos, and then you come back and you listen to this material again and see if it's starting to really make sense. Bootstrap can see every element as something you can break down into 12 columns. So if you have a page, Bootstrap can take any element and say, oh, all right, there's a container. Let's pretend I drew 12 columns. We can break it up, and then you can tell Bootstrap whether you want to place something here, or maybe all 3 of these. Now, it's kind of funny because for the longest time, people have said, never use tables to lay out the content of your web page. That's breaking really some of those basic rules and tenets of content versus layout. But that's why everyone says Bootstrap uses a grid. It's not a table. So you kind of have to throw that practical reasoning out for a little bit if you're going to be using Bootstrap. So with this table, we can basically say if you want to use 3 columns, it's the same as saying a width of maybe 25%. 6 columns is 50%. 9 columns is 75%. All 12 columns means you're taking up the full width of the page or that element. Every grid in Bootstrap consists of a container class, a row class, and then 1 or more column classes. So the actual code itself is going to look like this, where XX is going to be the viewport size, and YY is going to be the number of columns that you want to use. Let's take a look. So let's look at our example. The class is always going to start with those 3 letters COL. The XX component is the viewport size. So it's going to be XS for extra small, think your mobile phones, small for maybe those tablets, MD for medium, and LG is for large. Again, if you want to kind of think of numbers, you can think of something along the lines of about 480, 720, 992, and 1200. Now, I promised you a while ago you don't actually have to remember these numbers. I'm pretty sure that I got them wrong myself. So just remember more general concepts than the numbers. But you have to remember XS, SM, MD, or large. It has to be one of those 4 abbreviations. Once you've declared the viewport size, you can now say exactly how many columns you want this element to take up. Anything from 0, which means it shouldn't show up at all, to 12, which means take up the maximum width that it possibly can. So if you have an element that has class equals column extra small 12, you're saying, oh, if you're viewing this on a small screen, it should take up the full width. If you're looking at one that has a class of column small 8, oh, now you want to take up 8 out of those 12 columns, but only on the small screen. For column medium 4, you're saying, oh, if I'm on a medium screen, I want to use up 4 columns, or 1/3 of the entire screen size. And for column large 3, you're saying, oh, well, this is a large screen. It doesn't need to be as big as it was on those other screens. Let's just use up 1/4 or 25%. Now, this is the interesting thing. Many times you're going to combine these classes together. So let's think about if you're going to put pictures on your website. It's a very common idea to think, oh, well, on the small screen, I want 1 picture, and each picture should take up the whole width of the viewport. But if I'm on a larger screen, oh, well, then maybe there can be 3 across, and on a different screen, maybe 4 across. So let's imagine that I have an image, some sort of picture.jpg. And then we have our 4 screen sizes. So I might have my extra small, my small, my medium, and it's not quite going to look larger, but my large. When you look at column extra small 12, that means my image should take up pretty much the whole width. But if I'm showing this image on a small screen, I only want it to take up about half the size. That way, if there's other images, they can fill in next to me instead of under me. In the same way, if I'm going to have a medium screen, I only want it to take up about a quarter, leaving room for 3 other pictures. And then on a large screen, I'm going to draw it really small just to kind of be like, oh, I only want that to take up 1/6. So it's the same picture. It's the same HTML code. The difference is that on different viewports, the picture is going to look relatively big on a small screen and relatively small on a larger screen. So let's review that grid picture, but using the classes this time. Right here, we have nothing on there, but if I use column XX3, we're using 3 of the 12, or 25%. If I say column XX6, I'm using 50% now. Column XX9, 75%. And column XX12 means use up the full width that's available to you. But what if you want 2 elements next to each other, for instance, but only on a larger screen? Separate block, small screen, inline block on a large screen. Well, what we can do is we can start off by saying, oh, that yellow part of our page, well, on a small screen, I want it to take up the full width. But on a medium screen, I want it to take up only 3. So in here, when I'm looking at on a large screen, I'm only taking up 1, 2, 3 columns. All right. Then, if we add another div next to it, that div can say, oh, for this orange part, if I'm on a small screen, again, I want to use up the full width. But if I'm on a medium screen or bigger, well then in that case, I want to use 8 columns. Now, if you're following me, hopefully you are, wake up, you'd realize that 3 plus 8 only equals 11. I didn't use the whole screen. I did that on purpose because I wanted to show you that it's absolutely okay to not use up the whole screen. The second thing you might be wondering is, what about small and large? I didn't say anything for those. I didn't mention them at all. Everything, since it's mobile first, propagates up. So if I define something for extra small, then by default, it's also going to apply to small, medium, large. Unless I specify something for medium, and then that's going to overwrite everything for medium and large. So you can really get away with just specifying 1 or 2 rules and still hit multiple breakpoints. It's actually quite possible to write even easier or cleaner code than what I just wrote here. Whenever you want to say something should be the full 12 columns and it's block already, by default it takes up the whole width, you can pretty much skip this whole column extra small 12 part. Bootstrap knows to do that by default. It says, oh, I already knew you were supposed to take up the full width. You don't need to tell me. Instead, you can just specify those rules where it's going to change. So I've dropped the smaller part, and this new rule now says basically anytime you are on a medium viewport or larger, make it 3 columns. By default, Bootstrap is going to put things as far to the left as it possibly can when it's positioning them. However, it is possible to add a push and a pull class on different elements. If you have column XX, push YY, you're basically saying, hey, on any viewport that's X, I want you to go ahead and push this element Y columns to the right. In the same way, there's a pull, and here you move columns to the left. We're not going to play with this right now, but it was something that I wanted you to be aware of. In the same way, I want you to know about the responsive utility classes. Earlier, I mentioned that you can have XX or something like XS column 0, or really for anything, you can have column 0 hides it from the screen. It's usually a lot easier to use the hidden class instead. Hidden XX basically says, oh, make this visible on every viewport except for the one we're going to mention right here. In the same way, visible XX says, oh, hide something. It shouldn't be visible unless I'm on this certain size screen. The last one we have is SR only. And this is a special Bootstrap utility class for screen readers. It hides the content for everyone unless they're using a screen reader to access the page. If they are, then this element is visible to them and them only. So we mention and we talk a lot about how Bootstrap is this mobile-first idea and that larger screens inherent value from smaller screens. I really think that the grid class is a great example for you to play with this and see how they work. The idea that if you define something for medium screens, it also applies for large screens. If you apply something to extra small screens, it also applies for every screen size that's bigger. There's a great site at Bootstrap, bootstrap.com/examplesgrid, where you can go through and you can see some of the examples that they've coded up for you. Really important, do the math. If you've got maybe a third grader or a fourth grader at home, someone who's about 8 to 9, have them check. Because one thing you always want to make sure you do is that the columns that you want to be next to each other shouldn't add up to more than 12. Seems like a simple thing, but it's very important. In the next video, we're going to code together and do some work with this grid class. I hope you'll join me and you'll get a really good feeling about how this works with Bootstrap.